Thank you so much, Mr. Damon. And again, we want to get everyone excited. This is the last session that we actually have of the evening. However, there is also, the conference is not only a conference, but it's also a resource hub. So we have across the hall many exhibits and that we want you to actually avail yourselves to. Many of the people who actually had questions, we want to encourage you to actually go over there, meet with the people who have their various exhibits up from the various agencies that are actually supporting this wonderful conference. So as everyone actually finds their seat, we're going to get started in a few moments. I do want to do this. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't again thank the Civil Rights, the City of Austin's Office of Civil Rights. So please join me in giving a robust round of applause. This has been an exceptional conference. We also want to make sure that the other supporter and sponsor of this, the Texas Workforce Commission, that we also give them a robust round of applause as well. So please join me in doing that. And lastly, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development as well. So we want to thank HUD, we want to thank the City of Austin, and we also want to thank the Texas Workforce Commission. So as we actually begin this panel, let me just do a little bit to kind of set the stage. We have with us two real estate professionals and a lender that's going to share with us, and we're going to be discussing, and would help if I have my glasses on. And this panel is going to be discussing lost generation of homeownership. Will high interest rates and high housing costs result in a lost generation for home ownership? So we're going to have presenting in this order. We're going to actually start with Ms. Teresa Scott Tibbs, and she is a realtor from Peach Blossom Properties, LLC. We're then going to go to Mr. Alex Navarro, who is also a realtor with Alex Navarro Real Estate. And then we will finish out this panel with William Shipp, who's the Senior Vice President of IBC Mortgage. There has been, as fair housing professionals, as persons who are concerned with the 7 federally protected classes and that go beyond that, but I'll just simply say the 7 federally protected classes being race, color, religion, national origin, familial status, disability, and gender. We are very cognizant of the fact that home ownership is very important. It's often said that the primary way in which wealth is passed on in this country is through home ownership. Can we imagine, unfortunately, in the financial climate that we're in right now, the economic times that we're in right now, that we are at risk of having this dream of home ownership being a dream deferred for a generation of persons who are coming on, the Gen Zers, the Gen Xers, who are here to imagine that they are living with their parents. They're in a place in which that whole discussion about launching, or you have people being unable to launch even though they're educated, even though, as we've heard today, people having jobs, having to work 2 jobs, who still cannot actually cover the cost of actually renting, let alone being in a place that they could ever see the dream of home ownership. We're going to discuss this right now with our panel right now, and we have a number of questions that we're going to start with. Well, actually, we're going to ask them, but I first want to actually give each one of these panelists an opportunity to introduce him or her themselves, and we're going to first start that with Ms. Teresa Scott Tibbs, and if you don't mind, share with us a little bit about yourself and what your respective organization does.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to be here with you guys today. My name is Teresa Scott Tibbs. I'm the owner and real estate broker for Peach Blossom Properties. I have been doing real estate for 23 plus years, and I'm here representing the National Association of Real Estate Brokers and our local chapter, which is Austin Association of Black Real Estate Professionals. We have been working hard in our industry this year and in the past to make sure that we support democracy in housing, and so that is where I'm on this panel today.
All right. Next, we will actually go to Mr. Alex Navarro.
Yeah.
You have the floor.
Good afternoon. I'm a commercial realtor with 1839 Real Estate Group, and I also do have a commercial construction company. So I'm involved in the community. I'm a board member of Keep Austin Beautiful. I'm a water commissioner. So I'm seeing all the changes happening in this city. And honestly, when I got asked to be here, it was really an honor because There's definitely changes happening in Austin. I think we all know we're not in the same city anymore, right? And so I think with a proactive approach, we can come to a resolution and make home ownership affordable for everyone.
Thank you. And next, we're going to go to Mr. William Shipp. You have the floor, my friend.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Shipp. I am the division manager for IBC Mortgage. We are a subsidiary of IBC Bank. IBC Bank has been around for about 55 years, based in South Texas. We lend all over Texas and Oklahoma. Obviously, housing affordability has been at the forefront of our industry for the past couple of years with the high interest rate environment, and home ownership and providing attainable loan program has been certainly a topic of discussion at our bank. We ended up creating a special purpose credit program last year that offers 100% financing. There are also relaxed credit score requirements, and it's a program designed for first-time home buyers and low to moderate income potential homeowners. So I'm looking forward to our discussion here today, and hopefully I can gain some information and insight from all of you, and then we can help homeowners in our communities moving forward. Thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you. So when we're talking about homeownership, and there's some questions that we want to ask, and again, we're going to also give everyone here an opportunity to ask questions as well. So please bear with us as we actually move through them. So the first question that we have, and it can be anyone that feels comfortable actually responding immediately. How do you perceive the impact of high interest rates and soaring housing costs on the ability of younger generations to achieve home ownership in Austin, particularly those marginalized communities? And I made reference to the protected classes. You're talking about our Hispanic Latino community, our African American, persons who are disabled as well, being able to actually achieve and actually arrive at home ownership. Anyone's thoughts?
I would like to start because basically we as an African American culture, we are definitely seeing the impact with the higher increase of interest rates. But not only that, we're faced with the higher cost of housing. We have the low inventory, which means the price is going to go up, right? But in Austin, for those of who want to stay in Austin, our median sales price right now is $564,995. That means
Repeat that again. 564.
$564,995. That's the median price in Austin right now, which means that a person would need to make at least $158,000. That's depending on the interest rates. Well, with the interest rates going up, that means you're going to have to make more, right? So when we talk about affordability and getting people in houses and in home ownership, a lot of that we're having to take outside of Austin, unfortunately. Okay? What we're seeing in our younger generations is that they're getting out, they're leaving college, things like that, but a lot of them are not applying for loans anymore. As part of my organization with the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, every year we do a State of Housing for Black America, which is the SHEBA report. If you guys want to go on there and look at that on our website, it's www.nareb.com. You scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see the SHEBA report. That report tells you specifically the state of Black housing in America, and you will see that the young are not applying for the loans. They're between the 23 to 29% of the people who have applied for loans has dropped over the last year. So yes, we are seeing people not take advantage of that. When we look at that, there's a lot of barriers, and we'll probably talk about that later, but there's a lot of barriers of why people are not applying for those particular loans.
Mr. Barr, Mr. Shipp, either of you like?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, obviously the higher interest rate environment has put the crunch on everyone, but more significantly for first-time home buyers, underserved communities, we see it every day. As Teresa just mentioned, younger homeowners are living with their parents for longer. I think the home ownership rates before 2022 were a bit skewed because we were in a historically low interest rate environment, right? And so housing was much more affordable. But then COVID hit, and obviously the cost of homes skyrocketed. Now we have a rising interest rate environment. So how are we going to move and work through this moving forward until interest rates come down? But the danger and the risk is when rates do come down, I see the housing market, especially here in Austin, heating up again, and we're probably going to see appreciation rates skyrocket like they did, just a couple of years ago. So how do we all work together to provide solutions and, not only for affordable financing, but affordable housing, which obviously there's a significant lack of that, especially in this particular part of the area. So I think there is a risk, obviously, for future generations. But, again, hopefully the industry is much more in tune with what potential homeowners need out there. And hopefully we can figure out a way to get that information out there, right? Because it's one thing to have loan programs and affordable housing programs, but how do you inform the people that actually need it?
Outstanding. So before I pivot to you, Mr. Navarro, I said earlier that you're a realtor, but you also are a builder as well.
Yeah.
So, with that same question, in terms of your production of units, what are you seeing in that context?
Yeah, interest rates are high, and the cost of the houses are kind of leveling out because the interest rates are so high. But that doesn't mean that the cost of construction is leveling out. And so when you're building or you're looking at a particular tract to add more units, you are thinking of affordable housing, you are thinking everything, but you have these big construction loans that they mature not in 30 years, they mature in 5 years. And in fact, you're seeing a lot of multifamily individuals who've actually defaulted on $250 million loans, and they did everything right. They did all the pro formas right. They picked the right spot. It's just people can't afford to even rent, right? And so a lot of that is really to what happened in 2019. I mean, you've seen the cost of goods go up roughly 25%. And if you look at the Social Security cost of living, they're going up higher, right? Because they're determining what the cost of living is here in America. And, I call this, and a lot of people are calling it the silent recession, because the cost of goods are up, and apparently the labor market is thriving. We all know that is not the case. They're saying that salaries are increasing, and I think they've seen an increase of 22% in salaries. Well, if the cost of goods have gone up 25%, but your salary is only up by 22%, and then not even taking into account minorities who typically are lower salary, it's almost becoming impossible for them to own. And so, what I see for this young generation, it's not surprising that they're not applying, because they're only seeing what they're used to see. And now, I come from I'm a first generation American, low income class, but my parents still owned a house. They're not seeing that anymore.
Right.
They're seeing their parents rent. And that's just becoming the norm. And so when kids are seeing that young generation seeing that, why would they even go into their head that they can apply for a mortgage loan, right? Like, they are now looking at, families are saying, I need to pay for things for survival, food, gas, anything else associated with the cost of living. So home ownership is starting to become on the back burner. And as soon as, interest rates drop, we are, in low supply of inventory. It's going to make it even a little bit more impossible. And so what does somebody in construction have to do? Well, the cost of labor goes up. As soon as things go back up, everything goes up. And so this inflation battle, I think, is unfortunately here to stay. And it's going to take a lot of municipalities to be in cooperation with developers. I know developers have historically been looked at as the bad guys, but a developer could be getting a large size loan, exposing himself for a lot of liability, and still cannot guarantee that his project is going to come to fruition. Right. And so it's really a collaboration effort that needs to be done.
Indeed. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion in the media about the lack of units in the production wise, but that cost, the affordability issue can never trickle down or be impacted if we don't have units that are being built.
Right.
So thank you for that. The next question that we have is, in terms of barriers, what systemic barriers exacerbate the challenges faced by individuals and families, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds in accessing affordable housing amidst rising interest rates and housing costs in Austin? And I have heard already that it's been said that people are moving outside of
Yes.
the boundaries of Austin. Please, any of you share what you're seeing and what the trend is.
Absolutely. So that is exactly what we're seeing. Even with our special purpose credit program, the people that are utilizing it, especially in the Austin area, are purchasing in the outlying areas, Williamson County, further east, further south. Very few that are able to access and utilize that program in the city of Austin, obviously because of the area median sales price is one thing. Obviously, that's been exacerbated by the lack of supply. Demand is still outweighing supply by a significant amount. So how are we going to solve that or help alleviate that? And then the individuals that are purchasing homes now, at least the younger generations, they're borrowing money from their parents. Not everyone has the ability to do that, especially those in those underserved communities.
Indeed. And what the barriers that we're seeing is basically the lack of knowledge as it pertains to credit scores and credit history. I think one big thing that I have gathered from this conference is that we don't have a central point where you can go for the resources. You don't have a central point where you can go and sit down tomorrow and say, hey, I need to talk to you about my credit. I need to talk to you how I apply for a loan. I need to talk to you how I get a house. We don't have that central hub anywhere. And so that is something we need to take from this conference is we need a central resource hub that people can go to on a weekly or daily basis. The other thing that is lacking in our community is confidence. We don't have the confidence to know that I can go purchase a house tomorrow. We just don't. And so how do we set that consumer confidence? We've got to get out there in the field. They've got to see us. They got to see that they can achieve the goal of homeownership and give them some solutions on how to do it. If they can't see it happening in their own communities, then we can't expect them to have the confidence to think they can happen for them. And then lastly, one other thing is housing policies. As part of the role that I play with the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, I'm also with the National Association of Realtors, a director. And a lot of you have probably been seeing in the media the lawsuits that have been going on with the National Association of Realtors. That's going to hurt home buyers, okay? And how is that going to hurt home buyers? Well, now they're saying the seller is not going to pay for your buyer's agent commission anymore. You, as a first-time buyer or a home buyer, are going to have to pay your agent's commission. We're already struggling to pay the closing costs that we got now. Now I need to add another 3% on that. That's tough. But it's not enough people that understand that's what's going on with this particular lawsuits to get out there and start advocating for your first-time home buyers. Right now, the voice is the realtors, but we need homeowners, we need renters out there talking and saying, hey, this is hurting me. This is not helping this economy. It's hurting me.
Yeah, no, I mean, she's dead on. I think those recent lawsuits, the people who are really going to be affected are the people at lower income. They can barely, afford down payment, closing costs. They're certainly not going to entertain paying a real estate commission of 3%. And what's going to end up happening is you're going to see these one-sided contracts, right? Builders, if you go to a new build, if you ever read that contract, it is a one-sided contract. They are there to win, and you are there to comply or else, right? And so right now, we're not seeing a lot of traction in the market, but as soon as those interest rates drop, I mean, there was only about, 2 years ago when people were putting their deposits on new builds, and they increased the price because that's what the market demanded. And as soon as you complained, you're out, next person in line, right? But I agree. I think there's a lack of financial education, and people don't understand what a credit-based economy is. That's what America is. It's a credit-based economy. And minority groups kind of already have that disadvantage. You know, it's funny, I was thinking about this discussion, and, you know, at least I know when I grew up, it's like, you know, you would ask somebody what their credit score was, and it's like they didn't want to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And it's a reality because, you know, it's not going to go away. These things are not going to go away, and there's no centers where people can be educated about this. I mean, people barely know the difference between an asset and a liability, right? And now you have, especially the younger generation, that have the pressures of social media. You know, I tell my daughter, don't believe what you see. They're probably broke. You know, they got that BMW. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're wealthy, right? And so you have this younger generation really fixated with liabilities, and so that is kind of going to create a systematic barrier naturally because, well, in lower income houses, I mean, that's what you're seeing your neighbors do, right? Buy new cars. I mean, I remember new truck, but our house is falling down, right? And so I do think that if we don't take a proactive approach of teaching people financial literacy, it's going to have a profound impact across the country. Affordable housing, I think, historically was thought of, well, Section 8, low income. Affordable housing is affecting upper middle class.
Right.
That's a topic in upper middle class dinner tables. Taxes just came out. People are saying, "Wow, can I still afford this?" So I think affordable housing is going to be affecting the average American worker, unfortunately. So.
Thank you for that. The report that Ms. Teresa was remarking about, National Association of Real Estate Brokers has put out the state of Black housing in America, if I'm not mistaken.
State of housing.
State of housing in America. I've had the good fortune of actually being a part, reading it. Jim Carr, who's actually one of the authors, one of my colleagues, and in it, it spoke to this issue, and in response, because I was actually in last week in Manhattan at the Federal Reserve, because the Office of Housing Counseling, and in response, NARAB is actually having a Building Black Wealth tour, and that literacy discussion, having housing counselors be a part of that. I think the statistic was that there are 2 million African American borrow consumers who are borrow ready, but they just don't know. So with that, knowing that housing counseling is going to be important, knowing the discussion of how the dynamics that are in the market that are taking place. You've mentioned policy, and it's been broached, but I kind of want to ask a little bit more about that. In terms of policy, in case of what ways can policymakers and housing advocates address the risk of a lost generation of homeowners in Austin and the greater area due to the economic pressures? Are there innovative solutions or best practices from other cities that could be implemented here?
Well, I think in short, the simple answer is, policymakers at every level of government need to take a hard look at housing policies and make sure they make sense for the people in those communities. For many thousands of years, we built homes based on need, right? The types of homes. And, now if you look at the trends, somewhere in between 70 to 75% of homes in these communities are single family homes. Most of the housing laws are geared towards single family residents. We're running into that same issue here in the city of Austin. It's much more difficult, I'm sure Alex can speak to that, to build multifamily projects in various parts of the city. And, does that make sense in this current environment, where housing costs are so high, where interest rates are so high? So we need to, hopefully policymakers can take a look at those and make sure that, if we need to change something so that it makes sense for the current market that we're in, that we do that, and hopefully, and it's obviously impacted at all levels of government, not just local, but state and federal as well. And so I think that we need to start there, certainly.
Yeah, I think the solution is there truly has to be partnership amongst municipalities and developers. There has to be a partnership. They have to be in alignment. And I think I have actually applaud City of Austin. They just launched Affordability Unlocked, and
Right.
so that helps a developer. It limited the height restrictions and some of the setbacks, and so that allows a developer to get more dense. Well, the catch to that is you have to allocate 20 to 25% of the units for affordable housing. And so it's funny, I was actually looking at a tract here. So I work with developers and we were looking at potentially a tract that could make sense. But when we started running the numbers, it actually did not make sense, right? And so I really do think that I appreciate Austin has restrictions. Because you look at Houston, you look at Dallas, there's really not any restrictions. Well, you would say, well, there's a lot of housing, it's affordable. Well, the downside of that is there's no accountability either, right? When people are developing in floodplains and whatnot, and there's issues that people are being displaced. I do think there needs to be a median here in Austin, Texas, because the growth is coming, it's not stopping. And we need to really, in City of Austin, again, they're being really proactive, but there needs to be more of that. I think at the federal level, I personally think that if you are doing a master plan community, if you are doing multifamily, it almost should be mandated that you have to have certain amount of units or houses for affordable housing. Because again, inflation is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. I work with a lot of investors, but my personal opinion on short-term rentals is, I think that Airbnbs, the VRBOs, they need to be taxed really high, because what you're doing with a short-term rental is you're displacing somebody. And when you're living next to a short-term rental, you certainly don't like that at all. But I really do think that they should pay more taxes than putting that burden on the developer, putting that burden on citizens of whatever municipality. So I think there's got to be a lot of partnership, and specifically here in Austin. There's got to be more flexibility on building, and I think short-term rentals should be taxed really high.
Units that are going to be affordable, but who's watching that? Who knows that they really gave those 25 units as affordable to qualify, right? I know they say they do it, but again, right now, where is the enforcement? And that's the piece again with the education, because I don't think they're being transparent. They're getting tax credits to come into these communities. Show us where it's affordable and where you put those units and what you've done.
With that being said, we had discussion that was mentioned, inclusionary zoning ordinances. I live in Washington, D.C., but in the area, Silver Spring or Montgomery County has longstanding had a inclusionary policy of sorts with their moderately priced dwelling unit program. There's resistance. There's resistance when you actually broach things like that. The enforcement, that you spoke about, that lack thereof. With that being said, because that actually moves us to our next question, because this is Fair Housing Month and this is a Fair Housing Conference. How do you envision, all of you, how do you envision fair housing initiatives intersecting with broader economic policies to mitigate the potential consequences, or the consequences that we see now, of this lost generation of home ownership? What role can community partnerships play? And I know that Mr. Varro, you were saying that those partnerships, that cities and municipalities need to engage in that. There are programs. I know that, in fact, we want to encourage people when they leave. Housing Community Development actually has programs, but I want to say from that standpoint, then I want others to share, being able to join those, engage those, apply for those types of programs, is that in itself a barrier to be able to get to really kind of producing the type of units or offering the kind of units.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's a challenge. You know, when we look, I know we're looking really hard at affordability unlocked, and then you know you kind of crunch the numbers, and you know while you say, wow, they're gonna be a little flexible on height restrictions, on setbacks, I can get a little
Parking.
more dense, but then you go to the impact fees.
huh.
Then you go to all the extra permit fees that you have to still pay. And so when you're looking at the cost of development, it just doesn't make sense. So, you know, while I think the idea and the concept is great, is 20-25%, in reality, you know, as a developer, I mean, you could file for bankruptcy immediately. And then, I mean, we're seeing all these projects right now that are half built, 75% built. You know, you're seeing, you know, maybe they're going to, hey, we need an extension on our loan, and it's not happening. It's not happening. So I think there's got to be a lot more clarity. And personally, I think that municipalities and all the City of Austin council members they all have to be in alignment. Because when we're coming in to do a big project, I mean, we're pulling a lot of resources to come in here, and nobody knows that that project's going to do well, right? That's always a risk.
Yes.
I think we're kind of starting to initiate this conversation of affordable housing because now it's relevant. It wasn't relevant before. Now it's affecting all classes, right? So now it's a conversation. So the more that these things start to transpire, I think it may make sense, and I think it has to make sense because the supply is low. That's a reality, and the cost of goods are going to continue to rise.
But to kind of circle back a little bit in terms of inventory, now I want to talk about the fair housing part of this. There is a discussion amongst building and this issue. First of all, I want to also say homeownership is not you know, low. When we're talking about low-income residents, homeownership is an expensive endeavor. Just period. So in order to be able to qualify, so we're talking about people who are working-class people, and also impacting those who are middle income and above. Pivoting a little bit off of this, the inventory that we have in terms on the commercial side and the office buildings, I'm interested in what people's thoughts are about that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I'm hearing in the industry is that these office buildings, they're vacant, but they're hard to retrofit to get them affordable for any kind of housing. But, you know, when you're looking at a commercial project, and you can help me on this, they're saying that it costs too much to retrofit it into an affordable unit for somebody to live in. Okay? And that's what I'm just hearing on our side of the industry, especially when you get into like a big stadium. How are you going to retrofit that into a home? You know.
Yeah, you know, I actually practice more commercial real estate than residential, and there is this notion of repurposing, but she's absolutely right. It's not as easy as it seems to be. And the cost of it, you know, office buildings that have a lot of windows, right? You know how expensive it is to take all those windows out and, you know, put wood up there to make it conform to units. It's really expensive. And so in theory, you're like, well, we'll just repurpose it, but that's not the case. That's not how it works. I think, you know, again, it goes to city requirements. It goes to what the municipalities are requiring there. For years, we have excessively used land for parking, like excessively. And so now, you know, you're looking at all these parking structures. You know, it makes sense, but now we have Ubers, right? Now we have Lyft. Now we have people that are not choosing to have a vehicle. And so now, you know, I think, you know, I was reading an article of we have so many parking structures across the country that could be literally torn down, used for housing. And they're in great locations because some of the challenges that we face when we're having to look outside. I'm having to look outside the city as well for my investors to do projects. The cost of land here is just so expensive. But then, we go a little bit further out. Well, there's no utilities. So there's no infrastructure. So now the cost of pulling sewer is actually more than the cost of the actual land.
Yeah.
Right? And so, that turns into, the national developers, how do they recompensate all that? Well, they do the taxes. You as a homeowner, when you go to a new development, why are the taxes so high? Well, they got to pay that back. That's why they're in pits, muds, right? And so there is a lot of commercial real estate out there that is vacant, specifically office. But I don't think the solution is going to be, let's repurpose this to multifamily. I think it's going to be a lot more challenging than what people realize. I do think that we do got to look at we have a hard look at, a lot of these cement parking structures that are taking up precious land, right? So, and you look at retail's doing good. They're strong here in Austin, Texas. You look at industrial, it's starting to get stronger and stronger here. I don't know, we're in interesting times for sure.
So in terms of that, because I know that we have a little bit more time left, but I want to move to the next question. In terms of thinking about the consideration of the long-term societal implications of this loss in home ownership of the opportunity. I mean, there's a financial real estate community that will be impacted by this. The generational wealth is going to be a missed opportunity. So considering the potential long-term societal implications, if you don't have a city or rural suburban areas, you don't have people, you got a problem. How can we ensure that the current housing affordability crisis in Austin doesn't perpetuate intergenerational inequity and further exacerbate existing disparities in wealth and opportunity? And when we say opportunity, I want you to think very broad about that. When you think about opportunities, that means I want you to think about employment. I want you to think about education and how that implicates how that impacts our market. Any thoughts?
I would say the first thing we need to start with is we've got to band together. We have to have a collaborative effort. And we have to start going to the city. We got to go to the state, and we got to go national. There is a crisis. There's not a crisis just in Austin, but we're concerned about Austin because we live here. But it's a nationwide crisis that has to be addressed. No longer can we sit on the sidelines and not address the issues that we're having with not being able to pay our mortgage or pay our rents. We need some tax credits. We need some subsidies. We passed last year, as part of the Texas Realtors, we helped pass the homestead exemptions that you guys are now seeing, which are taxes. But that's not enough. We got to get more help with these taxes because we can't afford to keep paying these high mortgage payments with the taxes, right? And so there has to be other incentives out there for homeowners. First-time buyers, we need incentives for them. Why should they purchase a house? And so in order for that to come to fruition, I really think we have to get together as a group and go and talk to our leaders. We need to be at those city council meetings. We need to be at those state meetings, and we have to be at the national in order for them to know this is what needs to happen. Because if we're not a collaborative group and they don't see us coming in droves, then they're not going to do anything. We're going to have to go to those ballot boxes. I always tell people, my vote is my voice. That's how we get changes happening in our society, and it's time for it now.
I do want to kind of pull Mr. Ship a bit further into the discussion with, if we're not seeing loans being made, then that means mortgages aren't being made. Then that means that the taxes that pay for a lot of things that's not happening. Investors are going to only do this if it's making sense. And if we at some point if investors lose that appetite, I mean, I think people may think it's extraordinary as a fair housing professional. We want banks and we want lenders to make money. we want realtors to make money because that means that opportunities are being created. Do you see if that this market change in the market could, what implications does it have for our future financing mortgage lending?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of different ways that this can go and move forward. Obviously, as you mentioned, if lenders aren't active in the marketplace, if they redirect their financing towards other areas, there is somewhat of a risk of this generation being left behind. I think Alex touched on it earlier as well. If your parents didn't own a home, the odds on you owning a home are that much less. And that is how many, many homeowners in this country build that generational wealth that is so key. That's certainly, that's not what I want to see. I'm a native Austinite. I grew up in the city. My parents owned a home. They were lower income, but I think they bought their home for like $15,000, many, many years ago. And obviously, if I'm a first-time home buyer and I'm lower income, it's very, very unlikely that I could purchase a home anywhere in the city of Austin, even with affordable financing. So I think collaboration is a big part of it. Not only real estate, the real estate sector, but obviously banking and mortgage companies need to figure out how to work together to help solve some of these issues. And then, yes, going back to our leaders and leadership in government to ask for new or different legislation or change in laws, whatever that is. But it's about being proactive in the market and trying to do something about it. I think that is key. So, yeah.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and we do want to open the floor to questions as promised. So we're going to do that right now. So I see that you have the mic right now. You have the floor.
Hi, I think that when you talk about this affordable housing crisis that we're experiencing across the country, we fence ourselves in a box and we think just housing, but because I'm a transportation professional, I always think, how can transportation take the pressure off of some of these other ailments? And I think that somebody might have said it in a prior session, in a prior panel. Public transportation can really fix some of this. If we had, maybe if we focus on public transportation and there's affordable housing maybe in Elgin, but maybe not right there in Central Austin, how can we get people back and forth in a timely manner where the jobs are? That's a possible solution. And secondly, here's how government can come in and help. How many state office buildings, how many city office buildings are not at 100% utilization? What is keeping them from combining? People want to work at home. Why are we asking them to get on a crowded road and go to work when they can stay at home and work, and we can use that building and put several businesses in that building, free up that lot, and maybe put in some vertical high rises? There's just so many options, but we try to resolve this current issue with a traditional approach, and I just don't think that's going to get us to success.
Correct.
Any response? Anyone have any thoughts?
I mean, I agree. I think public transportation has got to be a huge investment, and I say across America, and even in the rural areas to figure out how you can get people from point A to point B. And you talked about commercial. What people don't realize is we're about to go through probably one of the biggest commercial real estate crashes very soon, simply because loans are due. The loans are due. And so there's no extension on these. You can't just go up. The small business owners can barely cover the rent, so they got to go. And then, just because investors are, wealthy, they're not cash rich. Most of their stuff is in, real estate. But if you can't offload that real estate quick enough, we're going to go through some issues. So public transportation, I think, is in my opinion, should be the #1 priority, especially in the city of Austin, which I think the public transportation is poor here. Out of all the cities I lived in, this is probably, the worst, which is unfortunate. But I think that's a good way to tackle it. In terms of remote work, I don't know. I saw all the city employees are clapping like, yes, let's work from home. So there's debate on that as well. So.
I would say definitely public trans is the key. When we did our bus tour yesterday in Colony Park, and just to kind of see where some of those bus routes were and compared to the neighborhood, I mean, people have to walk so far to get on the bus. If it is raining or storming, they're going to get soaking wet before they get to where they need to go. So I think when we talk about public trans, we need to talk about public trans across the city, not just on the west side of Austin. We want it centralized everywhere. In addition to that, you got people moving out into the Manor and Pflugerville and other areas. Then Capital Metro and the city need to be talking about collaborating together where we can connect all these pieces, because most of their workers are now moving to Pflugerville, Brown Rock, Manor. So work together.
Yes, ma'am, you have the floor.
Well, now I'm mad. My children are 36 and 33. They're college educated. One is a teacher, the other is in a construction-related sales field. Their hope of buying a home in Austin, Texas is zero. Zero.
Yes.
There's no way. Their friends have invested in Lockhart, in Bastrop, outside of Buda. They can't afford to come into work anymore. We have created, I am living with the lost generation. They're paying rent, incredibly high rent, and their opportunity to own a home is hopeless. I sent them a note about what we were talking about right now, and they said, step one, win the lottery. It's going to be that big. And you know what's breaking my heart right now? If you work for the city of Austin, can you raise your hand? Because, okay. Well, thank God some of y'all are listening. That's a problem now. We're not looking toward lost generation of homeownership. My daddy was able to get a house because he was a World War II vet, right? We were able to get a house because that was the aspiration, and we were the college educated ones. So now these kids that have that investment already, they can't see it.
Yes. Yes.
And it's really, it's real. I don't know what to say except that it's
Heartbreaking.
Like
It's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it almost is on some measure, I would say, almost evokes hopelessness in all of us. There is something, as because there is something we do have to wrap up shortly, but I do want to give something to everyone to give some consideration and thought to, in terms of the Fair Housing Act, and specifically dealing with the land use and planning that the Fair Housing Act covers. So I mentioned earlier in my remarks about affirmatively furthering fair housing provision of the Fair Housing Act. It's supposed to come out, we have an interim rule right now, but it's imminent. This rule actually but it actually helps to help local and state government to shape how they're deploying their resources to utilize what's called an analysis of impediments, a document that actually I like to think of as like the MRI or the X-ray of a community through a fair housing lens, looking to see where the protected classes, race, color, religion, national origin, familial status, disability, and gender, where the challenges and issues to people being able to access housing are, and they're to use this study every 5 years, supposed to do it, and then they're supposed to, on an annual basis, in the consolidated planning process, deploy resources to address these issues. This has been a part of the Fair Housing Act since 1968. I would probably say it's probably the most underutilized part of the Fair Housing Act. The work that we're doing, the work that you're doing, whether it's public or private, is impacted. And that's the reason why we want to thank the City of Austin and also Texas Workforce Commission for hosting this conference, because we're the believers. We're the people who say that there's a problem, that something needs to be done. So we have to keep being vigilant. We have to keep tapping other people we need to galvanize ourselves, but we need to tap other people to be a part of this dialogue, because pain makes everyone move.
Yes.
Pain makes everyone move. You cannot have a city without people.
Yeah.
Can't have food, shelter, water under Maslow's hierarchy. Food, shelter, water. When people don't have shelter, you will see people begin to make extreme decisions. That's going to be an affordable thing. That's going to be a very, very unaffordable thing to do. When people start making, as a educated black male, if my daughter's housing is in jeopardy and I can't provide housing to her, I'm going to start making some extreme life decisions. I'm going to start thinking about things in a different context. We can't, as a society, afford to do that. We cannot afford to do that, because once we are there, it is anarchy at this point. It is, things fall apart at that point. So we don't want to be at that place. We don't have to imagine what that's looking like, because there was a time in which the Fair Housing Act didn't exist. We know what segregation looks like. We know what poverty looks like. We don't need to have systemic poverty. We already have it right now, but we don't need to have it at a 50%, a 30, not just 30%, a 50%, a 75% of the people who are living in the area being at or below the poverty level. This society, we couldn't sustain it. It would be anarchy. So with that, Ms. Zanova, I'm at my time, but go ahead, you have the floor.
Yes, Mr. May, I just wanted, well, first let me thank the panelists for mentioning transit.
Yes.
I just wanted to say on the advocacy side, we could get Manor all the way to Leander and service the poor, as well as the people in the suburbs who are white and blind and want to get to Dell as well. So that's one point we can do. But to your point about the analysis of the impediments to fair housing and the affirmatively furthering fair housing, I know you mentioned that it's underutilized. I did a little research last night. But can you just share if there's any successful stories out there, or a place where we can see where it has been utilized, so we can see how it's
Yes, I can do
and
this.
invaluable too?
I'll say this very quickly.
Thank you.
The way that the affirmative furthering fair housing analysis impediments works, because it deals with transportation, education, employment. It looks at where the job centers are. So the successes are sort of like when you're dealing with I feel like I'm an ER doctor when it comes to actually cities and states. So my successes are when I can actually keep a city alive. That's the successes. I know that we failed. In fact, that's when the ER doctors kind of brought in that you come in. You're not coming in when you're at your best health. You're usually coming in a crisis, and that's when those things become important. So so for me to say, yeah, here, point to this place. This is the best place for analysis impediments. That's also like asking an ER doctor, well, how many healthy patients do you see? I'm an ER doctor. I don't see a lot of healthy patients. So it's a tool to improve and restore, in a justice standpoint, communities, cities, states, all across this country. So we need to all utilize that tool. Again, please join me, everyone, in giving a robust round of applause to our panel on the lost generation of homeownership. Will high interest rates and high costs result in lost generation of homeownership? Alex Navarro, William Shipp, and Ms. Teresa Scott Tibbs. Thank you all so much, and I now surrender the mic to Mr. Damon.